We had another big trade like right at midnight. So you could technically say today, depending on if you're in the East Coast, West Coast. Thing is, it involved 3 East Coast teams: the Memphis Grizzlies, the Boston Celtics, the Washington Wizards. Kristaps Porzingis, who was the big guy in this deal, no pun intended, again, he's 7'3", was traded to the Boston Celtics. In return, the Wizards got Tyus Jones. If I'm not mistaken, I think they got Danilo Gallinari as well, which I'll get into that component of it in just a moment when I talk about Boston. And the Grizzlies gave up Tyus Jones and got Marcus Smart from the Boston Celtics. So again, the big fish in this deal is Kristaps Porzingis. So let's talk about him first. So listen, he's a guy who's been, the unicorn of the NBA as he became known when he plays with the Knicks. He's a guy who people have lamented the fact that he's 7 feet 3 inches tall and is basically not a presence whatsoever. Posting up down low, that's never really been his game at any stage of his career. But listen, last season with Washington, he's a guy who averaged 23 points a game, career high, averaged basically a steal per game as well, shot 50% from the field, 39% from 3. So he had a good season. Now, again, he struggled to stay healthy, missed 17 games last year, which in the context of guys like Bradley Beal, his teammate, is not terrible. Initially, yesterday, if folks were reading the reports, he was going to get dealt to Boston in a deal that involved the Wizards and the Los Angeles Clippers. And Malcolm Brogdon was going to get sent to the Clippers. And I tweeted yesterday, I'm like, this is weird for Boston. You already have Gallinari. You add a better version of Gallinari in Porzingis, a bigger, taller version of Gallinari. But Boston needs guards. I actually suggested Chris Paul as a great fit for the Boston Celtics. And you give up Malcolm Brogdon? Like that to me, that would have been a very odd move. That would have been adding a strength on a strength, but your primary weakness, you just would have made it weaker. Thing is, Clippers pulled out of the deal because they were worried about Malcolm Brogdon's health. And so we'll see at that. If Boston tries to deal him in the future, potentially, we'll see what happens. This is going to be a crazy NBA offseason. I can't wait. We're technically already in the offseason, but draft tonight, free agency in 8 days, going to be very fun. But now with this deal, they get Porzingis, they give up Smart, and they give up Danilo Gallinari, who I said right when the Celtics season ended, when they lost Game 7, I did a special show on Tuesday. I said one of the biggest additions of the NBA offseason would be a guy who was already in-house for Boston. That is Gallinari. He's a stretch four, obviously is an excellent three-point shooter, is capable of putting on the floor, not as great defensively as you might like, but is capable in that end. He'll hold his own to a certain degree. And so, again, I said adding Porzingis when you already have Gallinari coming back is weird. Because, again, Gallinari, for those that don't know, signed with the Boston Celtics, I think in the buyout market, if I'm not mistaken, last year after he got bought out by the Spurs, and did not play a single game because he blew up his knee playing overseas. So I'm like, this is going to be huge for the Celtics next year. So you had a better version of that in Porzingis. So now this is a Celtics. Again, we don't know the point guard. As of today, it's Malcolm Brogdon, or maybe it's Derek White. Who knows? But you're looking at a Celtics starting lineup of either Brogdon or White, probably more likely White now that I think about it, because Brogdon's more comfortable coming off the bench as your sixth man. Good for him. He was the sixth man of the year. You have White, assuming they sign Jaylen Brown to the long-term deal, which I'm hearing reports that is going to be the case. White, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Kristaps Porzingis, and in all likelihood, either Robert Williams or Al Horford. I would start Robert Williams just to keep Al Horford, kind of what the Warriors going to do with Chris Paul, keep him healthy for the postseason because he's always been a solid postseason performer. And again, you have Brogdon and Al Horford come off the bench. I don't think it necessarily makes Boston the favorites. Again, I'd like to see them get a true blue point guard. And there are some potentially available, but I get it to a certain degree for Boston. Listen, this is a team that last year was not near as good defensively as the year prior with Ime Udoka. You have a guy like, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the coach's name. Joe Mazzulla coming in, and I said during the playoffs, I would strongly consider moving on from him if I were Boston. And it's not even Joe Mazzulla. It's not even his fault. Listen, he was the third guy. He was sitting behind the bench the year he was an assistant with Udoka. So now he's in this position where he's offered the head coaching job of the Boston Celtics at 30 years old, second year in the NBA. He wasn't going to turn that down, but he's seen a little bit over his head. But brings in Sam Cassell. There's a potential if things go haywire, if they go sideways for Boston, you move on from Mazzulla, you bring in Cassell, make him the head coach, which, by the way, me and my man John Rivera actually called that about a week before they signed Cassell. So we got to give both of us a pat on the back in that regard. Let's just put it this way. I'm lukewarm on it for Boston. I don't have any strong feelings about it. I don't love it. I don't hate it. Again, the thing for Porzingis is not great defensively. And again, he had some playoff games in Dallas where he struggled badly. He was a flat-out liability at times on both ends of the floor, with Luka just essentially trying to carry him. So Porzingis now being the third option, maybe that suits him. Because obviously it's Tatum, it's Brown, and then you go to Kristaps Porzingis. So I like it. I won't go any further than that. I like the deal for Boston, but I would really like to see them at a point guard. For Washington, well, now with the Wizards trade, now you got a backcourt of Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole. You got a true blue point guard. You got a shoot first shooting guard. Stereotypical shoot first shooting guard, especially in today's NBA, with Jordan Poole taking a high volume of threes. Washington is in a rebuild. They're embracing it. Again, they got a 2027 and 2030 pick from Golden State. Again, that's a long ways down the road, which, listen, I'm not trying to get off topic to the Warriors, but what do I always say? Notice the Patriots during that dynasty, they always made trades with Detroit and Cleveland. It's like, why are they always trading with those two? Because they know they can fleece them. Golden State made a trade with Minnesota. Why? Because Minnesota's a terribly run organization. They got Andrew Wiggins for nothing. They just had to give up D'Angelo Russell and got Andrew Wiggins and, by the way, Jonathan Kuminga because of the draft pick. So Golden State fleeced Minnesota. I think Golden State fleeced Washington as well. I think, again, I don't like the Beal fit with Phoenix. I think they gave up any sort of depth that they kind of had at that point with Landry Shamet come off the bench. Don't think Phoenix got better with that trade. But that said, my thing was that's all Bradley Beal went for. Given these two trades, I think Washington could have got a heck of a lot more. But they know what they were doing because of the Washington Wizards. They've been irrelevant for 5 decades. So shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. Here's the part that really confused me about the trade. Because Washington screws up every trade. That's what they do. They gave us Chris Paul for free, basically. And Boston. Okay, yeah, Kristaps Porzingis. I like it. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I like it. It's a solid move. It's a 23 point per game score on 50% shooting. My question is defense and durability. It's the Memphis component of it that I can't compute. Ja Morant's going to be gone for the next 25 years. You know that. I know that. Obviously, the Grizzlies know that. Again, by the way, at least the next 25 games, because I talked about the Ja suspension last week. He's still going to pass certain protocol that the NBA has in place just for him to come back in general. So it's 25 games minimum for Ja Morant. Memphis was in a solid spot given the position they were in with Ja missing 25 games where you move on from a net negative, just like Golden State did with Jordan Poole. Grizzlies did that to a greater regard. At least Poole gives you 20. I'm not a Poole fan, but at least he gives you 20 a night in the regular season. Dillon Brooks is a liability on both ends of the floor. So you move on from him. You move on from his shenanigans and his inability to play basketball at a competent level. You move on from him. Ja's gone 25 games. Well, you, until Golden State traded for Chris Paul, have the best backup point guard in basketball in Tyus Jones. Don't believe me? When Tyus Jones starts, actually, let's turn this around. When Ja Morant starts for the Memphis Grizzlies, they win 62% of their games. They have an offensive rating just short of 116 and a defensive rating of 112. When Tyus Jones starts, and by the way, this is all including the playoffs as well. When Tyus Jones starts, they go from winning 62% of their games to 72% of their games. Their offensive rating, while ever so slightly better with Ja, is neck and neck. And defensive rating goes from 112 to 108. It's better without Ja. Tyus Jones is a very good point guard. I'm not going to say he's great, he's an all-star. Tyus Jones was far and away the best backup point guard in basketball. You were going to be set. You win 72% of your games with no Ja Morant. And you gave that up, and you get Marcus Smart in return. Now, I don't want to poo-poo on Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart's a good NBA player. mean, he was just won Defensive Player of the Year last year. He's a good player. Okay, three-point shooter, although he can be really streaky in that regard. But he's gonna play his tail off on defense, and he's a good culture locker room guy. We know that. And by the way, the Grizzlies desperately need that. Here's the issue, though. Do we know for a fact that they're going to listen to Marcus Smart? Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson and eventually Ja Morant? Do we know for a fact that they're going to buy into the leadership of a guy like Marcus Smart? Because they didn't do so with Steven Adams. Now, Steven Adams doesn't have the credentials, doesn't have the accolades that a guy like Marcus Smart has. Marcus Smart, he's going into his 10th year in the NBA, so he's an established veteran in this league. Was a big part in the Celtics getting to multiple Eastern Conference finals, getting to the NBA finals just 365 days ago. Are we 100% sure the Grizzlies are going to buy into what Marcus Smart is selling? Because remember when Ja Morant was suspended the first time back in March with the nightclub incident with the firearm? Grizzlies held a team meeting. Steven Adams tried to talk to Ja in front of the team. Ja walked out of the room. Dillon Brooks, who is no longer with Memphis, but I have a hard time believing that Dillon Brooks, as clownish as he can be, is the only person who felt this way within that locker room. Remember, he had the quote alluding to, "We don't need veterans." That's what's in the water. That's what's permeating in the culture with Memphis. I think they need to add multiple vets, and Marcus Smart helps in that regard. He helps on the defensive end of the floor. Now they'll be even better. Again, a 112 defensive rating with Ja, a 108 defensive rating without Ja. They're better without Ja on the defensive end of the floor. That's not arguable. Wouldn't shock me at all if Marcus Smart makes him even better on that end of the floor, because that's what he does. But what do we always lament about Boston? Man, they don't have a true point guard. That's Marcus Smart is a 2, really a small 3, just because of what he can do in the defensive end of the floor. Memphis just gave that up. They gave up the guy who's been their rock with Jaws out at the point guard position. And they get a guy who's not a point guard. Wizards, I expected them to screw this up. Boston, I like them adding Porzingis. I like it. Like, I'm not crazy about it, but it's a solid deal. I think it absolutely could work. What Memphis did? You're banking on a lot of ifs. A lot of ifs. And by the way, a backcourt, let's talk about when Ja comes back. A backcourt of Ja, and who's really a score-first shooting guard, although he did lead the league in assists. So we'll give him just last year. So might have been this year. I forgot. Give Ja credit in that regard. And Marcus Smart playing the 2. Does that backcourt from a fit perspective work? Memphis being a part of this deal, even skeptics will say, well, they added veteran presence, veteran leadership. They did. But they got a lot of young guys in Memphis who thinks that they built a dynasty. Well, Marcus Smart's going to make it well known. Hey, guys, I was part of a team that played a dynasty in the NBA Finals. I was part of multiple teams that faced a one-man conference dynasty in LeBron James year after year. Y'all in a dynasty. How's that going to go over? I'm just saying, I don't know if this works the way that a lot of folks are thinking it's going to work in Memphis. We are just automatically assuming they're going to buy into Smart. I don't know if they will. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube. Be sure to click that big red subscribe button and go check out the other clips and full shows of Carving It Up Live. Have a blessed day.